endless splendor, every dancing star of light. Make us shine with gentle justice. Let us each reflect your light. Mighty God of all creation, gentle Christ who lights our way. Loving Spirit of salvation, lead us on to endless day.
Stand with me as we confess our sins together and receive our true and complete forgiveness and absolution. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. We will again, for Lent, read corporately Psalm 51. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your steadfast love, according to your abundant mercy. Blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity, and cleanse me from my sin. For I know my transgressions, and my sin is ever before me. Against you and only have I sinned, what is evil in your sight, so that you may be justified in your words, and blameless in your judgment. Behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. Behold, you delight in truth in the inward being, and you teach me wisdom in the secret heart. Purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. Wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow. Let me hear joy and gladness. Let the bones that you have broken rejoice. Hide your face from my sins, and blot out my iniquities. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. Cast me not away from your presence, and take not your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to them the joy of your salvation, and uphold me, the willing spirit. Then I will teach transgressors your ways, and sinners will return to you. Hear now that the Lord your God has given his Son to die for you, and for his sake forgives you all your sins. As a called and ordained servant of Christ, and by his authority, I do declare the sins that you have committed completely washed away. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. We continue with the Lenten song.
We're going to have to sit down, but I don't know. It says just a closer walk with thee. I don't expect you to walk out of here, but please be seated. And let us sing together, just a closer walk.
Daily walking close to
Now let us receive this evening's offering. Thank you, Jim.
Okay, so we have come a long way in the past few weeks, and I'm going to warn everyone, I have two doggles tonight, two clickers. One has a laser that works, one will actually turn the slide, so if I start getting off, let me know. As we start each week, we've come through Bethlehem into Nazareth, the Sea of Galilee, Capernaum. Last week we went down the Sea of Galilee. We went down the Jordan River Valley, talked about Jericho and the Dead Sea, and today we're going to make our way up into the mountains and to the Promised Land per se, and to Jerusalem. Often I say that this is an eyewitness account, right? And so when they came across the Jordan River and they said, let us do what? Go up to the Promised Land. That's exactly what they did. They went up the mountain range. There's a mountain range right in the middle there. Jerusalem and Bethlehem are two of the highest places in all of Israel. So as we always start off, the birth, death, and resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ is the most studied, bar none, thing in the history of the world, and yet it cannot be disproven. Well, I said one of them worked. Maybe none of them works. I'll try them both. Maybe one of them is outdoing the other one. No. Can you turn the slide? All right. Yay. Okay, so we see a bit of a different slide here, or excuse me, map, and that is Israel at the time of Jesus, what is referred to as Second Temple period Israel. Second Temple period Israel. Now, we want to talk just a minute because some people get confused on the week of Holy Week or leading up to Holy Week. So we're just going to go through chronologically really quickly so that we understand. You remember Jesus and his disciples took a journey to Jericho, and on their ultimate way back to Jerusalem, near Jericho, what happened this Sunday? What did we talk about? A blind man was healed. His eyes were healed. If you weren't here on Sunday, it's okay. It's archived on YouTube. You can go back and look at it and listen to the message. But a blind man was healed. That happens on their way to Jerusalem. Now, this is something very important. So if you remember the transfiguration of Jesus, right? Jesus is leaving Caesarea Philippi. He comes down to Nazareth. And when he gets to Nazareth, he tells the disciples just before they enter the manner in which he will die for the first time. He tells them 3 times. This is the first time he does it. Now, we know that there's a seismic shift that occurs there in Nazareth. Why? Because from that point forward, at least one thing is for sure. Mary knows something is going on. Because from that point forward, Mary never leaves his side until she falls asleep in the upper room and he sneaks out to the Garden of Gethsemane, and she's one of the very first one to come running when he has that cross, the 5th station of the cross where she meets him. So he heals the blind man in Jericho. Remember, we've come down the Jordan River Valley. We've come down the Jordan River Valley. He gives sight to the blind man, and then he's going to go up the Jordan River Valley, and he's going to go towards Bethany. Bethany, remember we talked about this. All cities in the ancient world were what? They were walled. Every ancient city was walled. Why? Because without the walls, there's no point in having a city. They were all walled. And so when at night, what did they do? They closed it up. Jesus does not stay in Jerusalem, nor does his followers stay in Jerusalem at night. They have to leave. And Jesus goes to Bethany or Bethpage, one of the two typically. Now, that is the place in which he raises Lazarus from the dead. And all of a sudden, we have, can you change the slide, please? We have multiple prophecies, big messianic prophecies being fulfilled. So the city was turned into 4 quarters now. Now, this is the old city as of now in Jerusalem. This is Jerusalem as you see it. And we're going to use some of this. Watch, my laser probably won't even work. Hey, it works. Okay, so we have a quarter here. That's the Christian quarter. We have a quarter here. It's called Armenian. That's also the Christian quarter. This is the Jewish quarter. And this is the Muslim quarter. Now, at the time of Jesus, the city was right here. This part, the 2 Christian quarters, were built by the Crusaders later on over the place of the death and crucifixion of Jesus and the burial site, to be fair. Now, the city of David is separate. Now, this is important because sometimes we put the city of David as the same thing as Jerusalem. When we're reading through it, sometimes we think the city of David, which is here, is the same thing, but it's not. The city of David is down here. It's a separate little city. It is also walled. At the time, it was a bit away. So at the time, the wall was here. So it was a little bit of a distance here. And what happens is the descendants of David have their own smaller city, and that in that city of David is where David's burial site is, where they entomb him. And David's family kind of lives in this smaller city. And so it's important to know this for a couple of reasons. One, because a lot of times people are confused. When Jesus leaves Jerusalem, remember, he's teaching on the Temple Mount, he gets mad, throws some stuff, he leaves, talks about the destruction, and he says he's not going to enter back into Jerusalem until his hour, right? And then people say, but what about the Last Supper? Well, he doesn't go back into the city. He goes to the city of David. So he goes and he says, go into what? The city of David. Find a man there. Tell him that Jesus is coming. And when you tell him Jesus is coming, say we need a place for the Passover meal. Now, a lot of times people think this is like we've said before, kind of a Jedi mind trick. Jesus is saying, hey, go find this person and tell him Jesus needs a room. Right? But that's not what it is. That's his family. They know him. He's from the lineage of David. Whenever he comes, at least once a year or more, he's now a rabbi. His family knows him. And so when he sends his 2 disciples in and says, hey, tell him Jesus is coming. We need a place for our Passover meal. They say, of course, we'll prepare the upper room. And we'll get to that in a minute. Can you change the slide, please? This, brothers and sisters, is the upper room. The upper room, if I can remember which one is my laser, is actually up here. The upper portion. These rocks on the top are added later by the Crusaders. This is a mosque right here. In this picture is all 3 Abrahamic religions, as they call them. You have Judaism, which is on the bottom. We'll discuss in a minute. This is still the tomb of King David. Above it is the upper room. Now, Jesus and King David are very important also to whom? The Muslims. So often people say, how are these sites still there with all of the war and the Crusades? Well, here's the thing. As it would change hands, remember, these sites are vital to the religion of both the Christians and the Muslim. They would have never been destroyed. If anything, these sites would have been surrendered before that. And also, another thing people don't quite realize, we'll see some more, this was seen as an offering, this mosque up here, as an offering to God. And the Crusaders would never have torn it down. It was an offering to God. It wasn't for them to tear down. And so you see this really beautiful exchange here. So King David was buried, and they created this building, this structure, for the greatest king of Israel. That seems pretty legitimate, right? And above it, they built a banquet hall. They built a banquet hall. And so when you hear the upper room, it's not like just some weird name. It's the upper room. It's above King David's tomb. It's a banquet hall above King David's tomb. Can you change the slide, please? This is below it. That is King David's tomb right there. You see there's a divider. You can see on the left-hand side of that man, the women go on one side, the men go on another side. This is King David's tomb, where King David was laid to rest. And so above it is the upper room. Now, people will tell us, we don't know where these places are, right? This is what this whole series is about. His tomb hasn't moved for thousands of years. 4,000 years it hasn't moved. And everyone that it was important to has protected it for all of that time. And so we can't have lost the upper room because we didn't lose the lower room. So we didn't lose the lower room. The upper room we know is still good. Okay, change the slide for me. This is in the upper room. This is one of our groups, and we're doing communion in the upper room. Now, I look really strange in that photo. Change the slide, please. This is the upper room. Now I'll say this, we give the artist sometimes a bad name because every time, and I remember this even kind of before I came to my faith, and I would see the drawing of the upper room is strange that everyone's on the same table or on the same side of the table. That is weird. But it's very like Roman architecture, and everybody's like, he blew it. Not really. It was the time of Rome. And so the Roman architecture's there. They created these arches. They had done some facelifts. The Roman architecture's there. I'm going to need your help. The one on the far left is a video. Can you click play? See if it works. There it is. That's the upper room. There it is. It's a large room. It's a banquet hall. It's a banquet hall. And what's really neat, some of you have been there, when you stand there, you are definitely standing where Christ stood. Not only Christ, but here's another thing that sometimes we forget. In the upper room, sometimes we think of that Last Supper, and we forget the disciples and Jesus were not the only ones there. But the disciples' families would have been there. Mary would have been there, Mary Magdalene. Martha and Mary probably stay back in Bethany for this portion, but the families would have been there. They're all there. They're asleep down in the courtyard, up here in this upper room. They're having their Passover meal. It's important to remember that Jesus calls the disciples to what? To him whenever they do the Last Supper. He's starting to teach again. denoting that there's more people there. We know there's more people there. Why do we know that? Because when they wrote of the head of the household, particularly. I think, for whatever reason, I think it's a prerequisite as a Sunday school teacher that when you teach about the feeding of the 5,000, you have to say what? There was actually more people, right? The same thing here in the upper room. It's the very same thing. And so it's important to know this, especially when we get to Holy Week, Maundy, Thursday, Good Friday. Maundy, Thursday, we're going to break the bread like they were doing then. And on Good Friday, we're going to have some Stations of the Cross. Specifically, you're going to want to look at the fourth station, because that's where Mary runs to Jesus. This is where she is. She falls asleep. Jesus leaves with his top 3 disciples, goes down the walls to the Garden of Gethsemane to pray, right? And then he is arrested at night while they're still asleep. He's taken into the walls. And at some point, we think probably Peter gets back to them and says, it's going down. And Mary gets up and runs as fast as she can to Jesus. Pretty incredible. This is where she was. This is where they were that night in the Last Supper. Pretty incredible. Can you change slides, please? So this is a blackout kind of map that I've done. And I've done this for a purpose. This is the old city of Jerusalem. Now, in the black area is a lot of new city. But this is still where the wall is. You can see the wall. It still goes all the way around the city here. This is the city of David. Do you see the separation and the wall? And I'm going to do it over here. This is the city of David. This is the wall that separates it. Still a wall that separates it. This is the Temple Mount. That's the Temple Mount. This is the Kidron Valley. This is the Mount of Olives. And this right here is the Garden of Gethsemane. So the Temple Mount, the Kidron Valley. The Kidron Valley is going to lead you all the way down to that place he was baptized in the Jordan River. This is the Mount of Olives. This is the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus is going to be arrested on his way from here to here. This spot right here that you can barely see, that's the Golden Gate. It's sealed up. We'll talk about that in just a minute. Please turn the slide. The Garden of Gethsemane. I told you we'd talk about it. It's next. This is the Garden of Gethsemane. Now, the Garden of Gethsemane was an oil press. That's the whole point of it. That mountain, or the Mount of Olives, specifically was like a vineyard for olive oil. Now, olives, specifically in the ancient world, are very important. And so this whole side of this hill was used for the city of Jerusalem. Remember, the olive oil was used for many, many, many different things. It was used for wounds. It was used for bathing. It was used as a way to keep food from decaying. It was used for many, many things. Olive oil was a precious resource in the ancient world. And so that whole side, that's why it's called the Mount of Olives. It was used as a big vineyard. Now, the Garden of Gethsemane would have been one of the little small lots or plots of land within that. And Jesus, for whatever reason, has a relationship with that owner. He loves the Garden of Gethsemane. He loves it so much that Mary, Mary died. She died in Turkey. In Turkey, present-day Turkey. She was with the disciples, the apostles at that time. She dies. But Mary wanted to be buried in the Garden of Gethsemane because she said it was the place that Jesus loved. And so we know this from Byzantine writings. St. Helena takes the Roman army to Turkey, digs her up, brings her back 300 years later, and buries her right there in the Garden of Gethsemane, and you can see it. That's pretty neat. There's a lot of stuff going on in history there. Lots of writings outside of the Bible for a big story, right? This is the Garden of Gethsemane today. Go ahead and turn one more. And the one on the right, that tree, not me. Someone tell me what a tree scientist doctor's name is. Herb something? What are they called? That's the one. Whatever y'all said, I think is right. They have said that this tree is actually a little older than 2,000 years old. Now, olive wood trees specifically, they don't die per se. As long as they're tended for and cared for, what they do is they create this outer shell and they continue to shoot stalks up. And so you see this kind of outer shell, and then you see that branch. Let me use this This is all like a petrified wood, this big old shell, and you see this new stalk coming, shooting out and resting on it. Here, petrified wood, new stalk. This tree was there when Jesus was there. That's pretty neat. That's pretty neat. Not that the tree's that old. There's lots of stuff that's old. But what's neat is that we know then that this was a cared for place. It was owned. It was cared for. We didn't lose a chain of custody from what? From the time of Jesus. That's important. Chain of custody is very important, specifically for those who are scientifically minded. And we have chain of custody of this tree from that point forward. Now the Franciscans have held this place for hundreds and hundreds of years, and they have cared for it. And it's really quite neat. They have another smaller garden off to the side in which they mature olive trees. So when and if an olive tree in this garden dies, they don't just plant a new one, so it's this weird tree out of place. They bring an aged tree in so you can see kind of what it looked like at the time. So that's pretty neat. Please turn the slide. This is another view of the, that's the tree there on the right. Another view of the Garden of Gethsemane. The Garden of Gethsemane still there. Keep going, please. Here we go. This is the chapel, the church built in the Garden of Gethsemane, which is really quite impressive. It's one of my favorite churches there in the Holy Land. It is called the Church of Agony, and it is really beautiful. One of the things that's neat is you see on the left that looks like paintings. None of it is paintings. The whole entire church is a mosaic, and it's very old. It's really quite neat. But in the right, you see kind of the limestone area there, believed to be, now, I'm honest with you. We can't articulate archaeologically this is the place Jesus kneels. We don't know. It could be. It's definitely somewhere in that garden. Church tradition says it's in that area right there that he kneeled and prayed before he was arrested. Pretty neat. Next slide, please. This is the church from the outside. On the left of the church is kind of the start of the Garden of Gethsemane, all the way to Mary's Grotto. And you can see that big mosaic up on the front. Now it faces directly across the Kidron Valley. There's a big valley, dips, comes back up to Jerusalem. Next slide, please. You see that here. Above us this is the outer wall of the old city. This is the Golden Gate. The outer wall of the city, the Golden Gate. Now this goes down into the valley and dips back up. Dips back up. Now this is very, very steep. Very steep. And from this point where we're standing, where he's praying, somewhere between here and there is where he's arrested. Somewhere between where we're standing and this Golden Gate. Somewhere between here, he's arrested and he's led through that gate. That's the gate he goes into on Palm Sunday, and that's the gate he goes into bound by the Roman guards. That gate. Into Jerusalem, into the Temple Mount area. Next slide, please. Now this is really neat. This is the Golden Gate as it looks like today. Now notice it's sealed. Many of you know that there are prophecies that say it would be sealed. It has been sealed, and it says it won't be open until Jesus comes back through it. That's a little, that's not really what this lesson is here for, but it is neat that it is still sealed. That's kind of going a little further. But this is what it would have looked like at the time had the gates been open. Now these would have been wood of some sort. Now if these were open and they have put the temple in there. This is what it would have looked like. The Golden Gate was the only gate, is still the only gate, even though it's sealed, that leads directly onto the Temple Mount. All the other gates, you have to make your way up to the temple. The Golden Gate was the only one that went directly onto the Temple Mount. It's sealed up today. There are no gates that lead directly to the Temple Mount. But this is what Jesus would have entered into. Straight to Caiaphas. Straight to the high priest when he's arrested. This is what he would have been led into as he comes up on the colt, on the donkey, on Palm Sunday, directly onto the Temple Mount. And that's pretty important. Next slide, please. Another look at it sealed up here. Next slide. This is just, some denominational pride, I guess. The tallest church in all of the Holy Land is what? Redeemer Lutheran Church, of course. Yes. In the 1800s, the Lutherans bought 2 square blocks in the old city, and they built this beautiful church. Keep going. Another shot of it. There it is. That's the Lutheran church there. All right, next. Doesn't have much to do with anything, but it's nice. This is the Temple Mount. Now, the Temple Mount is massive. Massive. From here to downtown Kerrville, you're still on the Temple Mount. It's massive. And so when you're reading in the scriptures and it talks about Jesus talking to thousands right on the Temple Mount, sometimes it's hard to get that in our head. But it can easily fit. You could fit a couple of thousand people right here. I promise you. It's massive. It's massive. It's huge. This is one of the largest mosques in the world, the Dome on the Rock, and it looks small here. So this is the Kidron Valley we talked about, right here. This is the Golden Gate. This is the Kidron Valley. This is the Golden Gate, which led straight up. All right, next slide, please. This should be a little video there on the Temple Mount, if you could click play. Something I want you to really take a look at, specifically, the trees that are on the Temple Mount, right? Sometimes it's hard because people often think of where Jesus was as a desert all the time. At Jericho, yes. Down in the Jordan River Valley, yes. But for the most part, it's not a desert. And so when you're reading the Bible and it says stuff like they went and found a cypress and a fir in the same place, people are like, that's crazy, that can't be. But they're there. They're all over. And they say, well, it doesn't work in this climate. It's not this climate. It's a different climate. It's a Mediterranean climate with mountains. It's different. It does work. They are there. It's in Jerusalem on the mountain range. There are quite a few trees. Okay, next slide. All right, again, we're going to go into this more. This is going to build to specifically the crescendo of next week, but we need to understand this. This is the Golden Gate. This is where the Dome on the Rock is now. We believe that the Holiest of Holies would have been somewhere near that same place. This is the Western Wall where the Jews mostly do their worship, and then the old city that it is today. This is a massive, massive area. Continue, please. Next slide. This is what the Temple Mount would have looked like in the time of Jesus. Second Temple period Temple Mount. You'll notice that the temple was much larger than the mosque that's there now. It was a very large temple. Holiest of Holies here, or the chancel. Where do you hear that before? Sanctuary. Nave. Sounds pretty familiar, right? This is the chancel, the sanctuary, and the nave. We have the chancel, the sanctuary, and the nave. Let me do it over here for those. Chancel, sanctuary, nave. And so that was the Temple Mount, specifically in Jesus' time. Next slide, please. Oh, actually, go back one time for me. Nope. 2 to the right. There we go. Nope. Here we go. All right. So this is an idea of he's coming up, he's arrested, he's brought through the gate. All right, next slide. All right. We don't have time for this. I promise you it was interesting. We'll get to it at some point. But I'm looking at that clock, and we don't have time. Okay, so this is what is important is I want you to know specifically this is showing you kind of the outer limits of the old city at the time. This has all been added, mostly during the Crusade period. This has all been added. And I show you that for a reason, because I'm going to show you when we get to next week and we actually do the Via Dolorosa, Jesus carrying the cross and each of the stages of the cross, and we're going to see those spots. So Jesus comes in, he comes in this Golden Gate, right here. He goes first to Caiaphas, then he goes over to Pilate, Caiaphas, over to Pilate, and then he gets sent back, Herod, back, right? And he's going to start his walk. Well, he's going to start his walk, and he's going to, you see this gate, or the wall. That wall is very important because that wall is not there today because this whole area has been built upon, But that whole area at the time was outside the city. That's where Golgotha was. That's where the hill of the skull was. And so he went outside the city. Now why? Because this is higher than any part of the city. Remember, we went up a valley to get here. This is the highest part of the city. And where Golgotha is, which is right in here, Golgotha was the tip of that point. This big hill, kind of like a limestone hill you see out here, which they used to put tombs in, hence the skull mountain or the skull hill. But the Romans used it because if they crucified someone on top of it, what would everyone in the city of Jerusalem see? That person being crucified for days and days and days. It was a very slow execution. Crucifixion was specifically for crimes against Rome. And so if you did something against Rome, everyone would have to watch you. Next slide, please. That's the Western Wall today. You can see how big, this is a very small part of the Temple Mount wall. You can see how big that is. Now this is the divide. You know, like what I think, I'm very proud of this actually. I won't say this is a big deal. I'm very proud of this. In every other religion, this is Judaism, you see what? A divide. If we go up on the Temple Mount and we see the Nation of Islam, Muslim, what? We have a divide, male and female. In Christianity, there's no divide, right? Unless you're Mennonites, I guess. But we're not Mennonites, so we don't have to worry about it. We come together. I think it's beautiful. It's beautiful. There's no divide. This is the women's side. This is the men's side. Doesn't look like it's completely set up correctly, but next slide, please. You see them wailing. Now, that, to be fair, that in Jewish circles, that's kind of a slam, I guess. I don't know. What do the kids say nowadays? A diss? Maybe that's old. I don't know. I'm out of practice. So Christians say Wailing Wall. They call it the Western Wall. Why do we call it the Wailing Wall? Because they wail, right? They sit there and they wail. They're lamenting that they lost the blessing, right? And Christians would say, what do you think you lost it? Well, maybe we should look at those messianic principles or prophecies and we'll figure this thing out together. But they lost it. They're asking for the blessing back. They're wailing. We go there quite a bit. Next slide, please. There it again, the divide. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, this one is the one I want you to see. It's a beautiful artist rendition of, this is the temple on the Temple Mount. And you can see here another wave. This would have been where the Gentiles could be, Jewish people could be, men could be, Levites could be. Gentiles could be out here, Jewish people could be in here, men could be in here, Levites only in here. Okay? But what's important is this hill on the back side of it, that's Golgotha. That's Golgotha. And so it's important that we have that understanding of this hill just outside of the city in which Jesus is going to carry a cross up next week to the very top. To the very top. Now, here's the thing. The messianic prophecies could have gone two different ways. Because it says, if you miss the Messiah, this is what's going to happen, right? But if you don't, world peace. Well, we didn't get world peace. So we obviously missed the Messiah. But what the Messiah was supposed to do is do what? Come through those gates and enter into the holiest of holies and take his seat as the Messiah. Now he doesn't do that, does he? Instead, he gets led up here on a cross. And so Christians, specifically in that area, they did not care about the temple anymore. After the temple was destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD, the Christians completely, they forgot all about it. So much so that the Temple Mount was used as a trash dump for almost 500 or 600 years. It was a trash dump. The hill, Golgotha, which eventually the church, the Holy Sepulchre is built on, became where the Christians went to. The Temple Mount became just kind of broken dreams, almost, in a sense. Right? Broken dreams, in a sense. And it wasn't until about 600, 700 years later, we see the first people coming from the Arabians coming over, practicing Islam, which was a fairly renewed religion at the time. They came to the Holy Sepulchre and said, we would like a place to worship. Can we worship here on the Temple Mount where Aaron supposedly was going to sacrifice his son? And the Christians said, go for it. Go for it. So that's why the dome and the rock is there. Even more so, if we can go back, let's go back. Keep going until I tell you to stop. Just quickly, because I'm looking at the clock. Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. Stop. One more to the right. Nope. This is tricky. See that? It's in an octagon. What did we learn? The first churches, the apostolic churches, the early churches, what were they built in? An octagon. All the first churches were built in an octagon, right? This is the only mosque really built in an octagon. Why is it built like this? And two, why does it have this Armenian painting job on it? It looks like all the Armenian Christian artwork that you've ever seen in the history of the world. Why? Because they built it. The Christians built this. The Arabians that came over, they were Bedouin. They were not skilled in building, and so. But what they did have was money, specifically trading with the Nabateans, the spice trade. They had money, so they paid the Christians. The Christians built the first mosque, in a sense. There, not the first mosque, but that mosque. And so it looks very different. Now, what's really neat too is the person who holds the keys to get into that mosque is a Christian family. And the person that holds the keys to get into the Holy Sepulchre, the holiest Christian church, is a Muslim family. And it stops people from fighting over when they go in. Okay, we're going to go back 5 or 6 slides. I'll tell you when. Oh, perfect. What is this? Did we just jump right to it? She's good. She's good. So, okay. This, I put a line in here because I want you to see right now, this is all the new part. I say new. It's 1,000 years old. Built by Crusaders, 1099 on. This is all where the new portion was. You can see, well, you can't really see, but it's sloping down. This right here, that's the Church of the Redeemer, the Lutheran Church. I'll just show you. And then right next to it here is the Holy Sepulchre, or the top of Golgotha. Okay, next slide. Oh, go back, wait, stop. City of David. No, it's okay. Oh, City of David. Not in Jerusalem. Not in Jerusalem. Okay, next. We get here. The Holy Sepulchre. It looks weird. The holiest place in all of Christianity. This church is built on the site in which Jesus is crucified, in which he's brought down from the cross, he's prepared for his burial, and then placed in the tomb. This is the church. It looks very strange because it's held by many different groups, the Greek Orthodox, the Russian Orthodox, the Roman Catholic Church, the Armenian Church. It is, to be fair, Lutherans were in there for about 200 years. Mostly, I think, because the Orthodox wanted to upset the Catholics, so they let the Lutherans in. But then in the 1800s, they built the Redeemer Church, and so they left. But it's held by many different churches, and so it's very difficult to find agreements, really. But they're doing massive upgrades now, to be fair. In the last year, they've started some pretty massive upgrades. Which is really nice. But we're going to go here. I want to point out just a couple of things to hopefully catch your attention. So you'll see this area right here. Jesus is nailed to the cross right here. This part right here, Jesus is stripped naked. He's nailed here. He's stripped naked here. And then in here is where the cross goes. And we're going to see all of that next week, but we're going to actually walk kind of the way that Jesus goes with the cross from Pontius Pilate to Golgotha as he takes the cross for you and for me, and we'll explain some of the theological reasons of why that needed to take place. So we have made our way around Jerusalem a little bit, and next week we have come up from the Jordan River Valley into Jerusalem. Jesus stops there at Bethany, Bethpage. He comes into the city of David. He goes out the outer walls of Jerusalem, down into the Garden of Gethsemane, where he prays, right? He prays after he does his Last Supper. We're going to talk more about this Monday, Thursday, Good Friday. He goes back. He says, it's my hour. He goes. He's arrested. He's taken on to the Temple Mount. Next Wednesday, don't miss next Wednesday. It is the crescendo. We're going to actually walk with Christ as he takes his cross to Golgotha. To Golgotha. Next slide, please. Again, you will know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. Now, The theological stuff we can debate all day. We can debate doctrine, dogma, which I hate. We can discuss all of those things, but you cannot debate the historical evidence of the personage of Jesus Christ. You cannot debate it. It's not debatable. There's more historical, archaeological evidence for the personage of Jesus Christ than there is for me right now. I promise you. There is. No one in Egypt's writing about me, or Canada's writing about me. Or maybe they are. I don't know. That'd be weird. But they were writing about Jesus, right? Outside of the canonical Bible, outside of the eyewitness accounts of the disciples and their disciples. So understand when people try to tell you that your faith is rooted in some kind of a fairy tale, it's not. It's rooted in historical places, and places that you can visit today. And we are going to continue with a song.
All right. I invite you guys to stand as you're able and let us sing our Lenten theme song, I Want Jesus to Walk With Me. Let us now pray the prayer that the Lord taught us. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Yours is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Let us continue with Let My Prayer Rise Up. Feel free to sing one section or the other as written on the screens.
Before the benediction, as always, I'm going to be seated. Everybody be seated, please. We're going to do a couple of the prophecies as we've been doing, right? We've been reading through these prophecies that Jesus has fulfilled all of these messianic prophecies. There's over 100 of them. We're not going to say all 100, but the ones that specifically reflect on tonight. So we left Bethany, where Jesus raises the dead. Lazarus, remember, the lame will walk, the blind will see, the dead will rise, were the big three that they were looking for. Sunday we talked about the blind one. Lazarus is raised from the dead. That's written 2,500 years before by the prophet Zechariah. That the Messiah would enter Jerusalem on a donkey, that was written again by Zechariah 2,500 years before in Zechariah 9:9 specifically. So that's pretty neat. He will enter the temple. That was 500 years before the birth of Christ. Malachi says that in Malachi 3:1, that he would enter the temple from the donkey, which is pretty neat. That he would be betrayed by a friend. 3,000 years ago, King David prophesied that, Psalm 41:9. And 3,000 years before Christ, sorry, that's not now. Betrayed for 30 pieces of silver. That was 500 years before. That was foretold by the prophet Zechariah. And thrown into the potter's field. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about Judas's body. That was prophesied also 500 years before in Zechariah 11:13. So there's a lot of people who say, well, there's lots of people who claim they were Jesus. It's true. There's lots of people that claim they were the Messiah, but there's only one person in history that we can articulate that fulfilled all these things. People say, well, that's a lot of that we can't articulate, but we can articulate where he was born. We can articulate that Herod tried to kill the children. These are outside writings. We can articulate that Pilate did crucify him, pierced him through. All of these things are prophecies that are foretold. So what I'll tell you this is, everybody do me a favor and just look at your hand real quick. I'm not crazy. Look at your hand, please. Everyone look at your fingerprints. No one in here has the same fingerprints as anyone else. You also don't have the same fingerprints as the 7 billion people on this planet. And you also don't have the same fingerprints as anyone who's ever been alive, because you're special and you're unique, like we talked about Sunday. Jesus says he knows your heavenly name. I'm going to say this right now. Jesus talks more about knowing you outside of this physical life than he talks about knowing you here. He talks more about knowing you before he formed you. There was a relationship before. He talks more about knowing your heavenly name and your heavenly body than he does right now. His relationship with you is eternal. That's how he sees it. It's eternal. You're a one of one. You matter. You mean something to him. That's why he does all of this. You matter. Having said that, receive your blessing. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. The Lord look upon you with his countenance and his grace and his love, and give you the courage to face this next day. Amen.
Before the sending, I wanted to make sure to let you guys know some difficult news. I'm surprised to see you guys here tonight, Lampmans. We've lost a dear one. Roger Lampman has passed away. Just want to make sure you guys know his funeral is Friday. Ooh, that's hard to say. At 10 o'clock, is that correct? Thank you. This Friday. Thank you, Roger, too. Please give them a hug if they're open to that, and show them your support and love in the way you feel led to do so. With that, let us go in peace, like he was saying, of knowing that Jesus knows ours and Roger's heavenly bodies so well. Let us go in peace and serve the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
And we will.
And we all will have a closer walk with him.